But it is a scary thing. We hear all these words: cyber attacks, phishing, spearing, and if I was in the Stone Age, maybe we'd think I was going on an exotic, fishing trip or something. But it's hard to know where to start, and so you can't boil the ocean. I mean, you can try, but you might look like this lady here with the blowtorch. And so for SWICKtech, what we really tried to do is stop for a second and think about, we're being attacked from every corner of the internet, not we, but like people in general, right? And also, people can crawl on your network from any crack or crevice. They look for the weak points, they try to exploit that, and then they, kind of transcend into the environment from there. And so it is really difficult to know where you should start. And, when I was kind of building this presentation, I thought, well, in our minds, this is what we think maybe a cyber criminal looks like, some faceless person in maybe their grandparents' basement, right? Well, maybe if you were in 2000 or 2002, that's kind of what was happening. It was just people that were being malicious for the sake of being malicious. We got a lot of pop-ups. It was very annoying. We didn't like them. And that was kind of it. But the goal has shifted. People are after money, and they've gotten a lot of money. They've been very well funded through the success of some of the attacks. As a result, the level of sophistication, as we just learned, has increased dramatically. And so when we think about that attacker or hacker in that basement with a hoodie on, the reality is this. This is organized business in other countries, as Jason had alluded to. These attacks aren't coming from within the US, they're coming from elsewhere. And some of these places are bigger than the office that we're in right now, and they're running pretty serious operations. They have, in some cases, a help desk, right? This is no joke. They have a help desk because they want to help you set up Bitcoin, because that's how they get paid. And if they do a good job, they'll even ask you for a review. And those reviews stand to tell people that are been attacked, like, at least this attacker is easy to work with, right? There's some comedy in that, but that's the reality that we're living in today's day and age. This is not the hacker in the basement anymore. This is serious stuff. They've been very well funded. They've had a lot of success, and they keep getting better. And the cybersecurity insurance plans are changing on a 2-month cadence, I think Jason said. I'm not sure if he's still in the room. Where'd he go? There he is. Okay, just so I can look at you every now and again. And really, I think what I want to talk about is the two primary paths that an attacker is going to take towards that goal of getting that money. And Jason spent a lot of time talking about the social engineering, so we're going to spend some time talking about the ransomware side of things. Right? Someone's going to get into your network, they're going to encrypt your files, delete your backups, and then hold you hostage in that sense. And there's overlap here, right? So I should have made this a Venn diagram maybe, because a lot of the social engineering will kind of lead to the ransomware, but for sake of conversation, we'll say we're talking about ransomware. And so what we did to try to, not boil the ocean and take this into some sort of approach we can actually help folks with as to where you can start. There's a lot of people in this room. You're all in various places in the security landscape as far as your security posture. So that spectrum, we've tried to identify it through a capability maturity model. We'll call it CMMI for short. This is a global best practice standards. Some of the biggest companies in the world use this model for various things. We've tried to apply security to it. You can apply other things to this. Manufacturers that we work with have used this model to determine where they fall on the maturity scale for being capable of doing Industry 4.0 manufacturing, for example. Okay? And so I'll zoom in on this image a little bit. And if we talk about where you're at as a level 1, think about this as being level 5 is the most mature, level 1 is the least mature, immature. And processes are unpredictable, they're poorly controlled, and you're really just reactive at that point. If we go up the ladder a little bit here, processes are characterized for projects. You're still kind of reactive, but you have some things in place. So you're starting to deploy maybe antivirus, patching, email filtering, things of that nature. And then level 3, you do have some proactive nature in how you're dealing with these things. You're maybe monitoring your environment. You're checking those systems, making sure that they're working, validating that they're there. And so now we're at level 4, and you have some processes that are measured. They're quantitative in nature. You can actually quantifiably measure these things, so determine where it's actually at. And then 5 is kind of the elusive bullseye, but you're always shooting for it because it changes so fast. If you get there, it's not going to matter, because in one day you're going to have to redo it again and continue to constantly improve that. So our approach to this, we're going to fill this in as we go. But most common level for businesses are a 1 and a 2. If we're talking about security posture, most folks are really there. The Global 2000, 3 and 4 is considered world-class by this CMMI standard, right? And very few are at 5. Apple would be a good example of someone being at level 5, being the most secure. And we'll kind of work our way to that. when we look at the life cycle of a cybersecurity attack, it's a very complex thing, right? It can, like I said, every corner of the internet, every crack and crevice in your network can be impacted. And these things don't start from left to right per se. You know, this can happen at any point throughout this. And this is a really simple illustration of something that's supposed to be complex. But if we're looking at a 100-day cycle here, if the initial infection comes through, we have, you know, the majority of the space where they're just kind of sitting in your network and monitoring, doing reconnaissance, determining, watching the email conversations between vendors and things of that nature. So it's really going to be a while before they actually do anything and escalate those privileges, maybe get admin access and then cause that damage. And so we tried to take that CMMI model with the security lens and try to simplify this as much as we could for today's sake and make this very linear from left to right. And you'll notice, like, we have level 4 up here, we have level 2 over here. It's because these levels can help you at various stages throughout this. The attack doesn't come in from the left and go to the right in this perfect manner. It can bounce all around, very complex nature. But what we're going to do is break down where these different levels can actually help you in this life cycle of a cyber attack. So level 1, no security. We talked about that being an immature kind of place to be. Little to no active security in place. And by the way, everyone, if you can't see this, you have this in your folder as well. So if you want to follow along there, we do have this printed out for you. So again, just to reiterate, I'm going to reiterate on this all the time throughout this presentation, but level 1, processes are unpredictable, poorly controlled, and reactive in nature. And so if you're at a level 1, this might be kind of how things go at your office, right? We're just going to let this thing burn. We have no one to deal with this. We don't have internal IT. Maybe the server's in a closet somewhere. Everything's living on that one box. You know, it's just hard to deal with it. And so we're going to talk about an example for namesake. We're going to call it the Krusty Krab, because I don't want to use any business names here. But I, for SWICKtech, sit in a sales seat. I would say 90% of my day is spent sitting in a sales seat doing outside sales. And so I was in a sales meeting with an organization, and it wasn't so dramatic as like, stop the meeting, we're under attack. But when I asked, how's your morning going? How's everything going today? Not good. We've just discovered we're under a ransomware attack. Our data is being held hostage and we're locked out of our systems. So we can't access our client list. Our email is on the same box. We can't do email, so I'm emailing through my personal Gmail account to reach out to people to tell them we have a problem. So I stopped the meeting and said, you have to deal with that and we're here to help you. Let me know when you want to engage and we can kind of go forward from there. They ended up reaching out within an hour. We spun up our team, kind of saved the day. It's hard coming into that without them being in our kind of infrastructure under our client base. But it was kind of like piecing together a murder scene at that point. We had to determine, like, okay, this is a mess, right? They're at level 1, so they're not even on that spectrum of what we looked at. So for them, like I had mentioned, they couldn't access emails. They had to use a personal Gmail account. Everything was running on one server, so their Exchange email was living on a server that was in a closet. That is also where they kept all their data. So when that thing went down, everything stopped. So the Krusty Krab couldn't send out their beautiful Krabby Patties, and everyone suffered. So that's on the low side of things. So as I talked about, they're not even showing up here at all. So they're very, very vulnerable at that point. I don't think people running an organization like this are at a level 1, right? So SWICKtech saved the day. I really just put this slide in here because I wanted to see SpongeBob doing a high five. Full disclaimer. And as we work our way up the ladder, level 2 is now we do have some entry-level security. So we're talking about things like antivirus software is in place. Email filtering is enabled, so we're doing some things to kind of weed out the garbage that might come through. If people, like Jason had mentioned, are the last line of defense, if we can reduce the at-bats that those criminals have to those people, that's what some of this stuff is doing, right? And so again, level 2, there's some processes characterized for projects. It's often reactive. And if anyone wants to take pictures along the way, we're going to give the slide out to everybody at the tomorrow or sometime this week. So patching is in place, antivirus is in place, email filtering is in place. These are some basic things. These are some rudimentary things that you should be doing. If you're not, we can have some conversations. But as we kind of go down here, where is level 2 going to help you in the life cycle of that cybersecurity attack? So, if a malicious email is received, maybe it hasn't been received because we've filtered that out, right? Or level 2 antivirus remediation takes place. If it's gotten its way in there, now we have actions and steps that we can take to actually remediate that virus from doing any further damage if it made its way in. And really, for the first example, if they would have been at a level 2, none of that stuff would have happened. After kind of reverse engineering that, the attacker wanted a 5-figure number, and they didn't pay the ransom. Luckily, we were able to recover from their backup and then restore them. And if they had some of those basic things in place, the computer that was the impacted machine and the user that had given that information out, it wouldn't have gotten to that machine. So some real basic things could have prevented them from, kind of coming to a screeching halt and ending our sales meeting, right? Basic security at level 3, you do have systems in place for verifying a user's identity. And the other big thing we'll talk about at level 3 is a secure password management vault or portal. And again, process is characterized for the organization, and you're being proactive at this point. I wanted to take a second to call out that at this stage, the training of people kind of fits into this too. So that's still a really important step. At this point, they're pretty equal, right? The systems and the people are both equally important at this point. I think this is just to reiterate that this is complex. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about MFA. Show of hands, please raise your hand. Do you know what MFA is? Okay. Keep the hands up, and then who's using MFA currently? Keep them up. All right, so there's some folks in here that are maybe kind of going through that. So good. It's a good group then. I don't want to patronize anybody, but just to kind of show for those that might not know, MFA is multi-factor authentication. There's 3 pieces to this: something you know, something you possess, and something that you are. So with modern cell phones, I guess we know our password, right? We possess this thing, this physical device. And then the biometric piece is, the thumbprint or the Face ID. So those are 3 pieces of information that if an attacker tries to do a phishing attack, they're not going to get through. The attacker sends an email, they open it, it looks legit, they enter in their credentials. So to Jason's point earlier about the woman at the big manufacturing company that was really into art, when he said, hey, do you want to grab lunch somewhere? If she would have kind of put those credentials out there by clicking on that link, if that was the way he had done it, he would have been asked to verify that sender, and it wouldn't have gone through. So MFA is, put MFA on it, is what we're saying here, just put MFA on it, please. It's going to prevent you from so many different attacks, and it's a really kind of a low-hanging fruit thing. If we're talking about a brute force attack, or reverse brute force attack, this is where credentials are stolen. We talked about this on the dark web scans, where they might actually have that password, they're trying to crack into something. Again, even if they have that password and we have MFA in place, we're going to stop that attacker from getting through. My phone's going to buzz and it's going to say approve or deny this request. And if I'm doing this presentation and that happens, I'm not trying to log in anything right now. So why did that happen? I'll deny it. And they've just gotten stopped. So does that make sense to everybody? Man in the middle attack. Now, I'm not technical in nature, so it sounds really fancy. There's something called like an evil twin network that you could be connecting to and not aware of. You could be communicating with someone that is who you believe them to be, but is really just there to collect information. And when they get that information, they try to log in, you guessed it, MFA saves the day. So they're like the Avengers, right? Saving the day without anyone ever knowing that the world was going to end. MFA is kind of like the Avengers of the IT world, I think. That's saving the day and you didn't even have a problem, right? Which is great. And so where should you put MFA? Our advice is, protect money and decisions. So anything from the accounting side of things and the financials, apply MFA there. Banks, the banking industry has really kind of pioneered that for us and really blazed that trail. So if you're a consumer, you're using like Chase Bank or US Bank or any of the major banks, I'm sure as a consumer you've dealt with that already. It's not that cumbersome. Protect your VPN access. So if you're out of the office or employees are out of the office and they're VPNing in, before they get onto that VPN access, put MFA on there as well. And then also on email. So we're really big with Microsoft and the Microsoft stack. And with Office 365, if I try to log into my O365 account through that portal, if I do it at home on my PC because I need to do something for work, if I go to do that, my phone's going to buzz and it's going to tell me to approve or deny that request. So again, putting MFA in the places where credentials are really important and where decisions are made. And who needs MFA? If you're going to start somewhere, I think everybody needs MFA for starters. I just want to make that very clear. But if we're looking to just kind of step into this, the place to start is decision makers, the C-suite, and the financial controllers. People in charge of money and people that are in charge of decisions. And in regard to MFA, we're doing an event on January 22nd, and we're going to train IT folks on how to actually implement MFA. There's a couple prerequisites, so I think there's information about this event in your folders as well. And when you go to that Eventbrite page, it'll talk about what those prerequisites are. So if you want to send some IT folks from your organization, if you have them, or you want to come yourself if you think you can handle that, we'd be happy to have you at SWICKtech to go through how to do that. We believe it's that important that we need to put MFA on everything we possibly can. It's one of the best ways to protect yourselves right now, and it's relatively easy, so to speak. Again, I'm not technical, so maybe the IT people in the room might be laughing at me, saying it's not that easy, Eric. No, it is easy, right? Okay. So an interesting example, in Texas, there was a ransomware attack that took place, and some of the folks in 22 different municipalities came into work and saw this screen or something very similar to it. And as I listened to the story on NPR, it was, someone that works as a police dispatcher comes in and they see the screen, or someone that's working at the local water utility plant comes in, they see the screen. And so now 911 calls aren't being fielded. You can't pay your water utility bill, which I think maybe that's not a bad thing. But you get into work, you look around, you say, hey, I got this screen, my computer won't turn on. You're thinking, great, Mondays, right? And then you turn around, your other employee has the same problem. Everyone in the whole entire building has the same problem. And then you come to learn the mayor is going on TV to announce a state of emergency because 22 towns in Texas had the same problem. And what ended up happening was no one could buy houses that day. Oddly enough, the title services were offline, and buying a house is painful enough as it is sometimes, right? No one could pay their water bill, which I talked about. That might not be the worst thing in the world. Court cases were delayed, and birth certificates and death certificates were not available. The hackers were requesting $2.5 million as a collective from the individuals, and it was something that could have been stopped with level 3 by accessing information, and MFA would have stopped that dead in its tracks. Based on how that attack actually happened, if you look at the story and you research the 22 towns that were impacted in Texas, it was a malicious email that someone had given information to, and that would have been dead in its tracks right there. So again, the MFA thing is just critically important. If I sound like I'm overdoing it, good. And so a little bit of technical here. Some of the tools that we use at SWICKtech to actually deploy MFA and use it: Microsoft Office, multi-factor authentication, easy to use app on your phone to put some of those things in there. In fact, we just had to re-authenticate some things this morning, and it took all about maybe 2 minutes max with some really basic instructions from one of our employees. So thank you, Shane. And then VPN multi-factor authentication is another one that we use. And then Passportal Password Vault. This is an area where you store passwords. Anywhere you can use an automatically generated password, that is the recommendation. And then if you put MFA on this piece of software so no one can get to it without that authentication, that's our recommendation there as well. On the password side of things, I know obviously Jason talked about that dark web scan, and you saw some of those really basic, like Summer123. My joke would have been to, you don't have to change your dog's name. Proactive security at number 4. So now we're really climbing a lot higher up in the ladder. So now you have advanced email signature and encryption methods in place to verify the email authenticity, and email authentication policies in place. So we're getting a lot more control here. We're a lot more measured. We know what's going on. There's checks and balances that the systems that we put in place from 2 and 3 are actually doing their jobs. And some of the tools that we're deploying at this level of security is Microsoft Exchange Online Protection, also known as what we call EOP. So that's just kind of the spam filtering piece of it. There's a lot of knobs and dials you can turn in there to crank that up or turn it down, depending on what's coming through or not coming through. ATP, Advanced Threat Protection. This specifically, I think, is what I was thinking of when you mentioned the woman at the museum or the art person, where it was just a link in the email that she had clicked. ATP is something that would actually scan the emails for malicious links and do that reconnaissance and identify if the link is going to take you somewhere that it shouldn't. So then it would have deactivated that link. If that email would have come through and Susie would have clicked on that link, it wouldn't have worked. So it stopped dead in its tracks there, right? So this is a layering of tools to put in place, again, to reduce the amount of things that can come through and actually try to reduce that human error by presenting less of those things coming through. Data loss protection is more on the internal side of things, internal threat protection. So if someone is going to access a financial document, for example, there can be anomaly detection that we can apply to that document if it's an Excel file or something like that. You want to be alerted if anyone that isn't a certain person is accessing that, it will alert you, or it can. Same thing if like a salesperson is looking to leave an organization, they start downloading a 500 customer database, we can set up alerts for anomaly detection to say something isn't right here, this is not normal behavior. We can identify those things with DLP. And then SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. We have some technical people here from SWICKtech that can answer questions about this after the fact. But really that's verifying that the email came from who you thought it came from. So I think about this like the post office. If Grandma Betty is going to send me something right in the mail for a Christmas card, the post office is going to do a notoriety seal to verify that it did indeed come from that person, right? So I think about that way, and maybe that's archaic because the post office. I'm trying to see if I'm like off base here. And I also think of that old football saying, they are who we thought they were, when the Bears lost. And the VCPI example, Jason, we were like on the same page with this, because this is an example of a company in Brookfield, Wisconsin that just had a major outbreak. They're a medical records company, and this is a screenshot of their website showing that they're putting this out to the world. That publicity thing is a real thing. It was 100 nursing homes that were impacted across the country, and it was 80,000 workstations or endpoints that had been impacted. So that same grandma, Betsy, that's sending me that card from the nursing home, now the nurse doesn't know what kind of care to give her. The nurse can't see what vitals she needs to give her for like medication, right? Because the medical records that they needed to look at to do that are not available. And if you follow that story, which is pretty fresh, it's like 3 weeks ago, there's some of those nursing homes that are expected to actually go out of business. And now these folks don't have a place to go, like they have to get rehomed into a different nursing home. And some of us are getting to that age where maybe we have parents in a nursing home, so that's scary for me to think about. So the impact of that attack, I guess I probably already said it, is the attack was, so I didn't say this, that attack was planned for over a whole year. And so if we look at that life cycle of that cyber attack, that 99 days, I mean, that was a lot longer there, where they really were very strategic about how they were going to deploy this particular attack for the VCPI. They were demanding $14 million. That company, Brookfield, can't pay $14 million. Even if they could, I don't think they should have, right? And there's, again, no guarantee that they would have gotten that back. So hopefully they have a good cybersecurity, hopefully they're not your client. And then I talked about the 100 nursing homes that were impacted, 80,000 workstations, and some of these are still dealing with the issues and are likely going to go out of business. That's scary stuff. And so where could that have been stopped? If we reverse engineer that situation at a level 4, based on how that story unfolded and how it said it was infiltrated, even though it took a year for them to kind of plan that, a level 4, by being at that place, that would have been blocked through the malicious, I think it was ATP, it was a link that was clicked. So, in putting this presentation together, we tried to find real-world examples that aren't far from home, so to speak, that could be very realistic threats for businesses like us in the room, and think about, okay, out of all the things that we're doing at SWICKtech, where could we have identified that these attacks would not have happened, right? And so for every one of these particular examples that are very real, Jason chose some of the same ones, we're confident that those attacks wouldn't have happened if people are using the things that we're deploying and training other folks, right? Where there's light at the end of the tunnel, I promise we're almost done, except the light got turned off because there's a ransomware attack. I'm just kidding. We're almost done, seriously, guys. So, scary, right? Level 5 is this kind of elite security. So we are doing some really, what I think is advanced things. Maybe some others would say, Eric, that's pretty normal stuff in the IT world. But that really is just the continuous improvement of those processes that we're doing. So focus on improvement and do more, right? But we're taking that CMMI approach and just making sure we can apply tools to those stages so we can identify someone who's much further along in that maturity scale, right? A level 1 likely isn't going to leapfrog all the way to a level 5, right? There are some prerequisites in place to be able to do some of the things that we're talking about as we kind of get deeper into this. So some of those things are geofencing. If we've identified that 99% of these attacks are coming from outside of the US and you're not running global operations, for example, we can put a geofence around the US, right, and make sure that anybody trying to log into our system from outside of the US, they just can't get in at all, right? And we can do that on a more local basis too, and we can set up permissions and rules with various users. So if a user is somewhere outside of a certain area, they can't do certain activities. So we're really kind of locking things down a lot more as we kind of get further down the line here. And you can take that as far as package management, which is kind of going back to that Apple example of them being at that elite level where Apple has their ecosystem. If I'm going to develop an app, and put it into their store, you have to go through these very finite guidelines and they have to approve it. And if I'm going to put that app on my phone, it can't run any infectious files on my phone because the phone's not capable of doing that. So really giving people the tools and access to different software applications, line of business applications that they need, and stripping out some of the ones that they don't that have the ability to run a malicious kind of virus or infection. So some of the takeaways for today, if it's me, put MFA on it. One thing I actually have been telling people in meetings is treat your network like it's already infected. If you're thinking that way, if you're not doing some of the security things we're talking about, you're on borrowed time. Like, it's going to happen. You know, it really is a matter of time. So think about, like, if your network are infected, that's usually when people take that big step to say, you know, something has happened, now I'm going to get an insurance policy. Something has happened, now I need to really take this seriously. Start taking it seriously now. And cybercrime is big business. This isn't the attacker in the basement. This is organized crime, and they're operating out of buildings bigger than this one with full call centers and help desks and user reviews and all of those things. So as some next actions in the folders, we do have a little slip there. And if you're interested, just check what interests you the most. We can do an IT security gap analysis based on the model I just kind of covered and determine where you fall on that maturity scale so we can identify any gaps and try to strengthen up your posture, your security posture. We can do a dark web scan, so that tool that Jason was showing with running all the email addresses on their domain, that's something that we can help you with as well. So if that's something you're interested in, we can see how many people have their credentials out on the dark web and what we need to do about that. And then we do have the Brain Food Academy, which is our Put MFA on It session on January 22nd. So if you're interested in coming to that, you can check that box there as well.